Hi everybody. On the workbench today we have a Blaupunkt SQR 23 car radio. Now, this came from the early to mid 80s 911s and Porsche 944 and 928s as well. I believe ending in 86, and from 87 onwards they used a different model. So I definitely want to check this unit out and give it a test, see if there are any problems with it, and if there are, see if we can maybe repair some of those problems. I'll probably break this down over a couple of videos because there's a lot to go through. Right on the front side, we've got power on the left. At the top, we've got the 3 radio bands starting with FM, medium wave, long wave. And then we have our 6 preset buttons over here. And this is a multifunction button which can either rock to tune the radio, or it's got the sensitivity of the tuner as well. So low, medium, and high sensitivity. I'll just leave it there in the middle. Next row down, we have a couple of tape functions. So this is the CPS, which is supposed to be like a music search. So if you fast forward through the tape, it will search for the next gap and then play the tape from there. Dolby noise reduction is pretty simple. Chrome tape is pretty simple. This over here is actually mono and stereo for the radio. So if the stereo broadcast is not working well, you can hit that button and it goes back to mono. These 3 switches over here toggle out, balanced left, right. You can see toggles very easily. Similarly with the bass and treble. Cassette port, fast forward and rewind. This button is to toggle the side. This is to eject the tape. Right, let's look around the back. What's pretty interesting on this unit over here is that it only has 2 speaker outs over here. And these are basically 2-pin DIN jacks. They come from the 1980s. I'll show you that it's a European standard. Here's an example of what the connector looks like over here, which we'll be plugging in. This is actually unusual with the Blaupunkt because the connector is square. Typically this connector is round. Let me show you what this actually normally looks like. Grabbing one of these regular connectors, here it is. So typically this is actually a round connector that looks something like this. I'll hold it up to the camera now. There we go. So this is what an ordinary 2-pin DIN jack looks like now, but of course these won't fit in the back of this unit. Right, so we have 2 speaker outs left and right. This is only a 2-speaker unit, not 4 speakers. There are splitters mounted into the car themselves to split this across front and back channels. But this is only a left and right speaker unit as well. And here is basically power. I'm going to go through the power in a moment. And then lastly is the antenna jack, stock standard antenna jack. Now usually on the units you'll be able to figure out the pinouts by the sticker on the top. This one is in very, very poor condition. So I've got a printout of here which I can show you, which is going to show you a lot clearer what's going on in the back of the radio. So you can see, as we saw before, there's the 2 speaker outs, and then there's a whole collection of connectors across. So from left to right, we've got ground on the left. From there, we've got the 12 volt that's coming from ignition. So that's actually going to be used to power the unit and all the power functions, such as the amplifier and everything else. The next loop over here is interesting because that's is for the dashboard lamp dimmer. So basically what this is about is that if you cut this wire, you can have a separate signal come through from the dashboard, which will basically tell the unit when the lights are on in the car, so to also turn the lights on in the radio itself. Now, in most installations in Porsche, this is just looped, as you can see over here, which means the moment the radio is turned on, the 12 volt signal that's being passed through is passed straight through to the radio, and the lights come on the device itself. The next one is a pinout, which is basically a 12 volt auxiliary signal. This can be used to power an external antenna if you have an antenna that goes up and down, or if you want to have a trigger to an amplifier for when it's used in that installation. And the last one is a permanent 12 volt, you can see over here. This is used so that the radio can store all of its memories. Right, so let me wire up this radio so we can start using it. So what I'm going to do here is I actually have a bench power supply. What I'd like to do is actually use that to test this particular unit on the bench. It's much easier than in the car. So we'll plug in the ground connection first on the very left. Then we're going to go followed by the 2 12 volt. I've got a larger and a smaller one here. This one is for the ignition. Then the next 12 volt over here. Well, let's first do the loop for the dashboard lights. So we can plug one of them in here. And then the next one is the next one over. Oh, this one's a bit tight. There we go. I'm going to skip the pin for the 12 volt output, which is for the antenna. We don't need that. And there we go. Right, so these are all powered in. I'm going to plug this into my desktop bench power supply. There you can see it over here. Positive on the right, ground on the left. Now let's do the rest of the connection. So we'll do some speakers. There we go, speaker left and speaker right. And lastly, the antenna. I just have a little cheapo FM antenna here that's off eBay. And there we have everything. Right, so now I'm ready to power on the unit. I'm going to turn on my bench power supply. You'll see I've actually configured that power supply. I'll lift up the camera to be 13.7 volts, 13.7, 13.8. That's typical of what the voltage would be for a vehicle with the engine running and the alternator charging the battery. If the car is off, of course, it'll be 12 volts. Anything between 12 and 13.6 or 7 should be just fine. Right, I'll switch on the unit and let's test some of the functions. So turning the volume knob immediately turns on the radio, and you can hear there's a little bit of a hiss. Alrighty. So I'll rearrange that a little bit so that we can see a little bit further. Let's test these functions. So FM is selected by default. Let's try medium wave. Nope, that's not working. There we go. Long wave. That's working fine. Let's try the preset buttons. 1, no. 2, no. 3, no. 4, no. Yep, 4 is working. 5 is working. 6 is working. No other preset buttons. Okay. Well, let's see if the thing radio tunes. I can hit the left button. Oh, and there it immediately tunes into a station, which is great. And then I'll switch it over to long wave. CPS that we can't test right now. And now I'm going to try the tape functionality. So I've got a tape. Let's pop this tape in and see what happens. Immediately splits the tape out. Try one more time. Yeah, I'll flip the tape over. And it gives it back to us very, very quickly. Right. This is pretty typical of these units. It's one of the classic symptoms. So we're going to try and repair some of these issues. Let's see what we can do with these buttons, see if we can fix some of them. I couldn't test more of the tape buttons because, of course, the tape is not staying in long enough, which is a pity. But I can really tell with some of the radio buttons that there is a problem there. So the next thing I'll do now is open up the unit. I'll switch that back on again, and let's open it up. Okay, so let's tear down this unit. I've unplugged it over here from my power supply, but I am going to keep these leads in because I want to be able to test it even whilst open over time. Now, differently from a lot of other units, this one doesn't have screws, but rather you can see over here that these two cases are just clamped on and kind of held together by friction. So it's got these little tabs over here that it sits on, and there as well. So the easiest way actually to open this thing is just to simply take a screwdriver and pry it in there and just kind of ease it open from all the different positions, and there you can see how it goes already. Let's go and move over a little bit. I'm just going to kind of work my way around. There we go. This is actually coming off real easy. Let's go to the other side. Do this a little bit. I'll work all my way from the back to the front. Just kind of gently prying it a little bit each time. Here it comes. Okay, seems to need a little bit more help here at the front. Let's take another smaller screwdriver, kind of pull it in there a little. Back is doing good. There we go, mostly undone, and then this top unit just lifts off, and here's the top. There you can see the top PCB. I'll put this aside for later. And let me turn my attention to the bottom, do the same thing. So let's kind of pry this bottom cover off. Over here, I'll do it on this side a little. It seems to come relatively easily on this particular unit. I think someone has been in here before. There we go. Last few little nudges on the side. her in. Take that cover off. There we can see the bottom of the unit. Now, as you can see here, the tape unit is actually almost upside down, facing down. And this is the whole cassette assembly. And so there's two repairs that we'll be doing throughout the series of videos. The first, of course, is to fix these buttons. And the second lot is to repair the cassette mechanism. So what I'm first going to do now is I'm actually going to remove the face. It's very easy to remove the cassette mechanism, but it's a lot easier once you've removed the face, which also gives you access to the buttons. Now see here, there's two screws, one over here, one on this side, and we only have to unscrew those two little Phillips screws, and that will give us access to remove the front face. So let me get a Phillips screwdriver and start removing those screws. So there's the first one. I'll remove one from the other side. And you can see the face is already starting to fall off. So that out the way. And now cautiously there we go. You can see the face comes off as a unit. There it is right there. And here is the front of the radio. Great. I'll put that aside for later. And now I'm going to turn my attention to the cassette mechanisms. Now typically we wouldn't need to work on this yet because I was going to fix the buttons first, but because I know that there's work to be done on the cassette assembly as well, I'm going to remove that so I can just have a little bit more space inside the unit. Now the cassette mechanism is very easy to remove. There are just 3 screws that are actually holding this thing in. So there's this screw over here, there's this screw over here in this corner, and then there's this Phillips screw on the front left. The other 2 are flat blade. The front right corner doesn't have a screw. In fact, there's a small little notch on the cassette assembly, and there's a small hole over here on the mounting plate, so it kind of seats in there to make sure that the thing sits correctly. You'll know that because the tape is nice and straight from the front. So let me remove those 3 screws, and then we can remove this cassette assembly. Now the reason we take the face off first is because of these 2 fast forward and rewind buttons. It is possible to kind of press them in and then lift out this cassette mechanism with the face on, but it's much, much harder. It's far easier to just simply remove these 3 screws. I'm actually going to switch to a different screwdriver. I'm going to use a flat blade that is magnetic because of these washers. I don't want to lose these washers throughout this exercise. So let me just grab my flat blade, of which the tip has suddenly, oh here it is, gone missing. There it is. I'll just use this nice magnetic flat blade so I can grab these. This one has a little spring washer as well with this flat screw. There you can see it over here. And you also need to bend this, seems like a ground tab, just slightly up just so it's kind of out of the way. Now I'll remove the top left one. This one just has a regular washer. There it is. You can see the washer on there as well. Store that for later. Then lastly switch back to my star or Phillips. So I can move the screw here in the front, which you can't really see right now, but there it is over here. I'm going to go ahead and remove that screw. Basically that just holds, there we go, this one doesn't have a washer, just a simple straight up Phillips. And now we can go ahead and remove the cassette mechanism. Now over here underneath is where there's a series of headers. It's a regular 2.54 millimeter. And you can just go and, if I lift this ever so slightly, and then you can see that this cassette mech, and I put a box underneath, is kind of being held in place by those. There we go. So I just need to ease out these. So I'm just going to use a quick tool just to remove these pin headers. There's the one. Kind of just probably pull them out with my fingernail. Here comes the second one. These cables are a little bit short here and there. Oh, okay, so this one just needs to be pulled ever so slightly because it's getting, there we go, the plastic is getting stuck on the case. And the third one over here, I'm going to remove that. There it comes ever so slightly. Now I can just go and pry that loose. Right, in later videos I will go through what the details are, what each of these pinouts are for. There we go, and there's the entire cassette mechanism free. Alright, so let me go and tidy up here a little. So there we have our radio, and here we have our cassette mechanism. Right, so that's kind of the fundamentals of opening up this unit. I'm not going to go into any of these 3 additional boards as well. These are used primarily by the radio tuner and the amplifier circuit. And then this bottom board is kind of what ties everything together. You can see over here that the face is connected by this ribbon cable. Something that over all these years is probably very nice and fragile. And these are the buttons themselves, which we're going to go tearing into in a little bit later. So that's the main unit itself, nice and open. You can see that the cassette mechanism sits inside this cavity. Here's the little detent I was talking about earlier that the mech sits in. And here's where the mechanism sits, and here you can see here's where that mechanism over there sits in that particular tang. And here it is, and this is the infamous PL51 board, which is the one that controls the entire cassette mechanism. So it's really a standalone unit. This can work without the cassette mechanism. And this is all completely standalone, controlled by this board over here. Except, of course, good Dolby functionality. That's done elsewhere on some other chips. That's not done by this board. But just the regular play, rewind, you can see the reverse of the cassette mechanism. But we'll go into this in a bit more detail a little bit later. So yeah, that's the basic teardown at this point in time.